Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel. Okay, so today I have January's wrap-up, all of the books that I read in the month of January. I ended up reading 21 books in January, and I sort of felt like there were times when I was kind of feeling slumpy, and so I wasn't necessarily always wanting to turn on my audiobook or to pick up a book, so that was kind of a bummer, but I did still have some really good reads, and a lot of them were 5 stars. So let's go over the stats really quick for what I read. So 21 books, 8 of them were historical romance, 7 were contemporary romance, and 6 were either fantasy romance or paranormal romance. So they were 100% romance. What else is new? And now to the star ratings, I had 12 5 stars, 4 4 star, 3 3 star, 1 2 star, and 1 1 star. So I haven't had a 1 star review in about a year. That's kind of interesting. I listened to 17 of those on audiobook. That's my preferred way to consume my books. I read 4 of them physically, whether through a physical book or an ebook. And 5 of the books that I read were ARCs, which is advanced reader copies for review. So, alright, let's go ahead and get into all of the books that I read and my star ratings. So the first book that I want to talk about is No Holds Barred by Stephanie Nicole Norris. This is a book actually that I read at the end of the month, but I wanted to mention it first because most of the books in here, if you've been watching all of my reading vlogs or recent reads, I've already talked about most of the books in here. This one I haven't mentioned anywhere, so I wanted to put it first. This is a contemporary romance. This is a Black author, and it is a Black romance, Black love, and I really enjoyed this book. I saw this in the Audible sale. They were having a sale for like $5 reads, and I noticed this one because the cover was beautiful, but also it's narrated by Jacoby Diem, who is the narrator for Grip in Kennedy Ryan's Grip series and Canon in Real. He also did Keenan in Hookshot. Like, he's a fantastic narrator, so as soon as I saw the cover and he was the narrator, I just didn't even question it, and I just bought it, and really was wanting to listen to it. So I listened to it, absolutely loved it. It's basically the romance of our heroine who's just come out of a broken engagement. She's moved to Chicago from Florida. She's wanting to really make a career, make a go of it for herself, and she ends up being alone at a breakfast table one day at a restaurant. And lo and behold, here comes our hero, Hunter, who is just completely shook with this beautiful woman, sees that she's alone, invites himself to sit down and have breakfast with her, and they have just this wonderful chemistry and connection together. I felt like this romance was so completely sweet. It was very swoony. It was a little steamy, definitely, and the steam was really written beautifully, but mostly the thing that I loved about this book was it was just so engaging. The writing really flowed. I really just was very invested in this couple. I thought it was honestly just a really great time. Very short audiobook, it's only like 6 hours, but I really enjoyed it. I didn't give it 5 stars, mostly just because of some things that happened at the end, which is pretty common. I have several books in here where the third act conflict didn't work for me, and that kind of dipped my rating a little bit. But honestly, I really loved this story of this big, powerful alpha playboy of a man who finds the woman who's going to be it for him, and I just had a great time. So I'm very excited to continue this series. It features like the rest of the brothers. They're a really big family. So anyway, 4 stars for that one. Really enjoyed it. And then the next book that I want to talk about is Misconduct by Penelope Douglas. So I definitely have not vibed with a lot of Penelope Douglas's books. Really, the only book of hers that I have loved is Birthday Girl, and so I heard a lot of people recommending this book to me. That they said if you love Birthday Girl, you might really like this, so I was really excited about it. This is another age gap romance with our heroine is the teacher of our hero's, like, teenage son, so it's a little taboo in that way too, and I was honestly very disappointed in this book. This was nothing even close to Birthday Girl for me. This was very much only heat-driven, which, you know, Penelope Douglas, she writes great steam, but that's never going to be enough for me because I really need story and emotional development, and it was just at a 0. That was not happening here. It definitely had a lot of like I said, like a lot of steamy scenes. There were some great dirty talk in here, but it was honestly like, that's it. That was all that there was here, and I just was bored a lot of the time and just very disappointed because while I knew that it wasn't going to be as good as Birthday Girl, I still definitely went into this with, you know, expecting that type of romance where they have this great connection and they have this powerful attraction. I really wanted to see the taboo element of it, but sadly, I felt like all of those were under-delivered, and this was very disappointing to me, so 2 stars for this one. The next book that I read is The Beast of Besik by Emily Howard. This book has been on my TBR since it came out. I've honestly just sort of been like holding on to it. I've heard so many people really love this book, and I adored it. I thought it was fantastic. It's a Beauty and the Beast retelling. I gave it 5 stars. I thought it was just a great time, and it was just the perfect pick-me-up that I needed after reading Misconduct and really hating it. This is basically about our heroine whose younger sister is going to be married off to a very despicable man, and she is not about to let that happen. She's very protective of her younger sister, so she of course goes to the only man that she thinks can save them and offers her hand in marriage to him, who is the Beast. He is a damaged hero, he's scarred, and it was their romance, and honestly, I just love this. I thought it was purely delightful. It was just honestly just a completely enjoyable read. I just absolutely loved it. 5 stars. Okay, the next book that I read is also one that I feel like I am one of the only ones who has this opinion of it, and it is Darling Venom, and I gave this book 3 stars. I honestly picked this up purely because of the hype. I was hearing people really, really loving it, that it was a very emotional read, and I was like, that is ringing my bell, so I'm going to pick it up. And the narration in this is really excellent. You have 3 different narrators. They're all really well known. Sebastian York is one of them, and they were just fantastic. This, however, didn't work for me in a lot of ways. I spent a long time in a reading vlog talking about why this book didn't work for me. This book starts with 2 teenagers who meet when they are both planning to attempt suicide and jump off of a roof. Because they both meet up there, they sort of enter into this pact where they agree to meet back at that same place every year and not to kill themselves. So there is trigger warnings in here for attempted suicide, loss of a loved one, self-harm. Honestly, this book is very heavy. It has a ton of trigger warnings, and I do feel like the author had some parts in here that were really beautiful and that were handled with what I would consider to be an appropriate amount of care for such a sensitive topic. However, it was juxtaposed with some scenes that really didn't fit the tone at all. Some that seemed like they were purely in there for spicy TikToks to be made, which I just found extremely off-putting. And I also didn't love the ending in here. I just really wish that it was a happily ever after, but it just seemed a little distasteful how that happily ever after was presented. I just really didn't love it. So I feel like I see what this author was trying to do with this book, and I think that her attempts had some really, really good points, and that's why I gave it a 3 star. But, however, the things that really docked it for me were just so glaringly offensive with a book that is dealing with such a sensitive topic that I honestly couldn't see past that, and so I did end up giving it a 3 star. So I didn't end up saying that for a few years, when these 2 characters, our heroine and this teenage boy, are teenagers, they meet every year, they're still alive, and then one year the boy ends up killing himself before she can get there. So it's actually her romance with his older brother. So there's a lot of complicated family dynamics in here, and I actually really enjoyed that aspect of it more than I actually did the romance. I felt like the romance really just sort of seemed to be floating in here as we were dealing with so many other complicated, emotional issues that really revolved around family. So 3 out of 5 stars. Was pretty disappointed in this one too. Okay, and then I read the remaining 3 books of the Bedouin Saga. So the first one is Slightly Tempted. This is, I believe, I actually don't even remember. I think there's 6 books in the series, so this one is 4. But this one is about Morgan Bedouin and a French gentleman, and this one is probably one of my favorite books in here because it takes such a really beautiful look at Morgan's self-growth when she believes that her brother has been killed at war, and her blossoming romance with this Frenchman who has sort of been pursuing her as a means comes to get revenge, and they actually end up having a really deep, beautiful love instead. I adored this book. I think this is a true standout in the series. It's deeply romantic, a little bit slow moving if you're used to something that's really steamy right off the bat or really fast paced. Like, this whole series is a slowly building but a beautiful look at this family and at these people's lives. I just adore this series. This one is probably my favorite of the whole bunch. I love Morgan. So 5 stars for this one. The next book is slightly sinful, so this one actually has Edwin Bedouin, who we believe to be dead from the previous book. He is found on the battlefield naked. He's been, like, stripped of his clothes and robbed of any good, like, riches or whatever that he would have. He's found by our heroine, who is a young lady who is living in a whorehouse, basically, with a bunch of prostitutes, and they are going to go and rob graves to help them to survive because they're in a financial bind. And it is their love story. There's amnesia in here. It was honestly just a little bit of a bonkers plot, which I think was kind of rare for this series, and I just loved it. This one was another 5-star read. I thought it was fantastic. I adore this series. I do think that, for me personally, my favorite books are the last 3, and the first books are definitely building up the family, and sort of, you can see Mary sort of setting up threads to come into play later on in the series, and I love the series. This one was a 5-star read for me. It was fantastic. Okay, and the next book that I read is Slightly Dangerous. This is the last book in the Bedouin saga, and this one has the Duke, Wulfric Bedouin. And honestly, the entire reason I started reading this series was to read this book. I was just going to read it as a standalone. And I'm really, really glad that I didn't. A lot of you mentioned, please go back and read from the beginning. And I'm so glad that I did. And I'm so glad that I did, because that added so much understanding and depth to Wulfric's character growth. And I really, truly, truly loved that, because this book, out of all of them, I feel like is one of the slowest paced. Like, this one is a slow burn, an extreme slow burn for Mary, where she's usually a bit of a slow burn writer anyway with her romances, but this one seemed to take even more time to develop their romance, but when it did, it was very, very satisfying. We have our starchy Duke, Wulfric, and his mistress has just passed away, and he's sort of realizing that he actually had a lot of emotional feelings for her. He doesn't want to get married, he doesn't want to have the burden of the dukedom on his shoulders and raising an heir, so he is just trying to find another mistress to fulfill that role when he sees our heroine, and he just has to have her. She's a little bit quirky, she is a widow herself, and she sort of doesn't automatically fall into his arms right away. It takes her a little bit to be won over, and I just really loved their romance. I thought it was beautiful, and I gave this one 5 stars too. Okay, the next book that I read is Electric Idol by Katie Robert. I gave this book 5 stars. I really enjoyed this. I go into these books by Katie not really expecting a super fantastic plot that's going to really dive deep into these Greek myth retellings. Like, when I go into them, I really want a sweet, well-developed romance, some great steam, and just a good time, and that's exactly what I got here. This is an Eros and Psyche retelling, and this really leaned in heavily to the Huntsman and Snow White element of that myth, where Aphrodite sends Eros to go and kill Psyche, and he obviously cannot because he is just so overcome with his attraction and feelings for her, so he offers to have an arranged marriage with her, so it's a marriage of convenience. Their romance was very sweet. It was honestly one of the sweetest romances I think that I've read by Katie. Psyche is a plus-size heroine, and I feel like she's one of the best plus-size heroines that I've ever read. Her representation was fantastic. I loved that Katie made her plus-size and made her this absolute beautiful goddess that Aphrodite was threatened by. I thought it was perfection. For the things I was looking for, it hit all my bells. I really enjoyed it. It was a fun time. Their romance was wonderful and delightful. 5 stars. Okay, the next book that I read is Ravishing the Heiress. This was our Rake Appreciation Society book club pick for January, and we had an excellent discussion about this book. This is one of my favorite discussions that we've ever had for a Rake Appreciation Society book. I adored that chat. It was so fun. I loved seeing everyone's different opinions. I loved hearing why you liked it or why you didn't. I thought it was just fascinating how we all took so many different things away from this book. I myself ended up loving it, although I completely see how this is not going to work for everyone. I adored it. I felt like it was deeply emotional. It was so emotionally angsty, as in, like, there was just so much, like, longing that the heroine had for the hero, and the hero was sort of a tortured soul trying to decide what to do and longing for his teenage love. It was a wonderful time. This is basically our heroine who ends up being in an arranged marriage to a duke, he passes away. So the next in line, which is Fitz comes along to marry her. He actually is in love with someone else, and they've been like childhood sweethearts. They had planned to marry, and all of a sudden he cannot. So he is not wanting to consummate this marriage with Millie. Millie, however, upon seeing Fitz, just falls head over heels in love with him at first sight, and she pines for him for many, many years. When they marry, they agree not to consummate the marriage for 8 years because she's so young and he's still so in love with this other woman. So it's basically this very long spanning book. There are some where you go backwards in the timeline to see past events, and then you move forward. And I thought that was such a really interesting writing device, and I felt like it worked really well here. And I just truly loved watching their relationship develop from basically allies in this arranged marriage to friends, and then you could see the depth of their feeling just build and build over time, and I just thought it was just beautiful, and I adored it. 5 stars. Okay, the next book that I read is The Spy by Sophie Lark. This is the 4th book in the Kingmaker series. This is her series that is all about children of the mafia parents from the Brutal Birthright series this is basically a new adult series. They are sent to this academy that is basically a boarding school, like a college type of setting on this remote island nobody knows exists, where they're going to go and learn how to have careers in the mafia. So it's a very unique setup. Each book is full of a very excellent romance. Honestly, like, I was very invested in the romance in here, but also the surprise couple in this book. I was just sort of like shook, and this book made me cry because of them. I just loved it. I don't really want to say much about it. There is an overall plot thread that goes through each one of these books that, when you get to the very end and you see it revealed, is one of the most satisfying reading experiences I have ever had. I thought this was incredibly clever, just very intelligently written. It was a page turner. I could not stop thinking about this book, this whole series, the whole time I was reading it. I loved it. I thought it was just fantastic. 5 stars. This is one of my favorite series of all time. Each book in the series is 5 stars for me, and I just love this series. I think Sophie Lark is fantastic. I literally cannot get enough of her books. Just love everything she writes. Okay, the next book that I have to talk about is Entreat Me by Grace Draven. So this is a fantasy romance. This is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and this was a 5-star book for me. I have read Grace Draven before, and I have really enjoyed her books, but I was still not prepared for how much I was going to deeply love this book. This book is so completely beautiful. The fantasy world in here was very clever. It was very unique. It does stay close to the traditional Beauty and the Beast retelling that we're used to seeing and that we like to see. There were some really fun nods in here to other fairy tales that we know, like Snow White and Sleeping Beauty, and it felt familiar, but at the same time it felt very fresh and new. I loved the romance in here with our heroine, who actually is coming to protect her sister, who they believe the younger sister is going to be the one to marry the hero's son and break the curse that way. But it's actually the romance between the older sister and the dad. So she is a widow. She is a very strong female character. Like, she is determined to take care of her little sister. I really loved that part of the story, but I also truly loved how confident she was in who she was and what she wanted, and her confidence carried over into her ability to go after what she wanted and to not be afraid to ask for what she wanted or what she needed. Like, she was just fantastic. She's one of my favorite heroines that I've ever read. Their romance was achingly sweet and also very, very steamy and just completely satisfying. I freaking loved this book. I thought it was fantastic. It's going to be on my favorite list of the year, probably 5 stars for sure. Okay, and the next book that I read is Monroe by Cressley Cole. If you're a fan of Immortals After Dark, I'm sure that you have heard a lot about this book. This is the newest release in Cressley's Immortals After Dark series. I did get on her ARC team, so I read a review copy of this, and I freaking loved it. It was honestly everything that I could have wanted in a new Cressley book. This follows Monroe, who is the twin of McCreeve. McCreeve is one of the books that you definitely have to read before you read this book to get the complete story arc there. So Monroe is basically captured by these demons or sorcerers, and he is being tortured, and he ends up meeting his fated mate, ends up watching terrible things happen to her, goes back in time to rescue her, comes back in the future time. All of this is to try and secure his fated mate, and so that she will be his, because that's a big, huge thing with the werewolf shifters in here, the Like. It's just honestly fantastic. This book was so romantic. Something I really, really loved in here was watching Monroe really fight his instinct to just completely take and claim the heroine, Kearney, who was a very strong heroine, and she definitely resisted the mating bond, and she really was not a fan of the creatures of the lore and the immortals. Like, she wanted to stay human, so it took some time for her to get fully on board, and it was really beautiful to watch Monroe honor her agency and her wishes while at the same time still wanting to just make her his. Like, it was just beautiful. I loved it. 5 stars. Okay, the next book that I read was Tempting the Bride. This is the last book in the Fitzhugh series by Sherry Thomas. This book was freaking beautiful. I gave this book 5 stars, and I honestly can't decide if I love this one or Ravishing the Heiress more. This one deals with some characters that we did see in probably like 20 or 30 pages in Ravishing the Heiress. It's with our hero, who is a friend of Fitz, and the Fitzhugh sister is the heroine. She is in sort of a salacious relationship with a married man, and our hero has been like pining for her, has been in love with her for years. But of course he's the type of guy that can't express his feelings to her, and so he just ends up like constantly teasing her and poking at her, and she like fires right back at him. So there's a moment when the heroine is about to be ruined when someone finds out that she's going to meet this married man. And our hero finds out about that, and he goes in to rescue her and propose that instead that he was with her instead of her being with this married man. So they end up in this marriage of convenience. Then, of course, she is not happy at all because she doesn't love him, doesn't want to be with him, and feels irritated that he took her choice away. So she's upset about that. Then, of course, the carriage accident happens. She gets amnesia, and she totally, completely forgets her relationship with this married man, and she forgets being married to the hero and forgets any animosity that they may have had towards one another. So it was basically like a second chance for her to actually fall in love with him. Oh my gosh, it was so freaking beautiful. The hero has a daughter that he has had by a mistress, and he has her as a part of his life. And just watching her interact with the Fitzhugh sister, like, it was honestly like so sweet. Like, I loved this book. It was fantastic. I gave it 5 stars. Okay, the next book that I read is Eidolon. This is the second book in the Wraith King series by Grace Draven. This book is a fantasy romance, and so the first book in this series is Radiance. So at the end of Radiance, I absolutely loved it. I wasn't quite sure what else I really needed to know in this couple's story. So I was really, really surprised at how invested I was in what was happening to them in this book, because their love, their marriage is threatened because because of things that are happening in the political climate. There's wars that are happening, and Brishan, the hero, sort of has to ascend to be a king, and Ildiko is really consumed with this concern, this question of, should I let him go so he can be a king and have an heir with another member of the Kai race, or do I keep my husband and stay by his side, even though that might not be the best thing for their people? So it was honestly a little heart-wrenching, like very much so. It did end very happily, and I really, really loved how this book ended. The emotion in this book, to me, was so incredibly beautiful, and just watching this married couple really have something threatening their peace and their happiness that they had worked so hard for, and watching Brishan just absolutely stand by Ildiko and not want to lose her at all was just beautiful. I gave this book, I think I gave it 4 stars, but as I'm talking about it, I think it maybe is 5 stars. So this is a 5. I did give this book 5 stars. Sorry. I gave this book 5 stars, totally loved it. It was another Grace Draven book I'm going to talk about in a minute that I gave 4 stars. 5 stars for this one, freaking loved it. Maybe even loved it more than the first. It was beautiful. Okay, the next book that I read is Twisted Hate by Anna Huang. I am also on Anna Huang's ARC team, and I got an advanced copy of this, read it, really enjoyed it, gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. 4.5 out of 5 stars. This is an enemies to lovers contemporary romance, basically an enemies with benefits type of a romance. This had some extremely hot scenes in here. I really loved the hero Josh. He's the heroine's brother from the first book, and you could just completely believe and feel how these two were enemies or antagonists towards one another. They definitely didn't get along, but you could also see like the sparks just combustible between them. Like, it was powerful and beautiful, and I really, really loved it. This book was very, very hot. Contemporary enemies to lovers usually doesn't work for me, but this was just fantastic. I thought it was done excellently here. I really loved Josh's slow unthawing and his questions of, do I love her? Do I not? Like, it was fantastic. My issues with this book really have to do with the final conflict in this book. There were some things in there that I didn't love that obviously I can't tell you or they would be spoilers, but other than that, I adored this book. I love Anna Huang's writing. I think that she's fantastic and she always tells a story that just completely captivates me. So 4.5 5 stars for this one. Okay, the next book that I read was His at Night by Sherry Thomas. This is another historical romance of hers, and this is a really interesting one. This has such a different feel than her Fitzhugh series does. This really leans into a little bit of almost a comedic vibe at times. We have our heroine who is basically taking care of her aunt who is an opium addict, and she needs a caretaker, so that's the heroine's role. She's on the verge of being a spinster. She doesn't really go out in season anymore, and she's feeling like she's going to be stuck with her abusive uncle, and she doesn't want to be. So she goes to a ball one night, and she sees this man. They connect eyes, and they both have this feeling of, this is the person for me. The hero is actually a secret agent for the government, and so he puts on this persona of being kind of like an idiot, a bumbling fool, a bit of a just not exactly the sharpest tool in the drawer, you know what I'm saying? Like, just kind of a bumbling idiot, basically. So when the heroine meets him, he puts on this act because it's, you know, a cover for his secret spy things that he's doing. And the heroine is, you can tell that she's like getting very, very disappointed because the more he speaks, the more she's like, wow, you are growing less attractive the longer your mouth keeps moving. So they end up in a marriage of convenience. There is a big emphasis in this book on the overall plot having to do with his secret agent works and her uncle, and the romance really didn't work for me. It just took way too long to get anywhere, and then when it did, it was basically like, oh yeah, and then they love each other, and then it was over. So I really appreciated the Sherry Thomas's writing. She really is able to spin a very well-told story, but the romance in here was just very underwhelming and just didn't quite work for me, so 3 out of 5 stars for this one. Okay, the next book that I read is another Grace Draven, and it is Dragon Unleashed. This is a fantasy romance. This is the second book in one of her series that is traditionally published. This is basically all set in a land or a country where magic is illegal. So the hero is actually a dragon shifter, or a dragon who's just basically wearing a human skin that he's trying to keep hidden that he's a dragon shifter, or else he'd be put to death. He's trying to find his mother's sacred bones that will help him restore him to power. When he is tracking them, he ends up meeting the heroine, who is in basically like a traveling traders type of thing, like they sell goods and wares, and he believes that she has those bones. I really, really loved this fantasy world in here. I thought it was really just a little bit, not anything that was outlandish, like it seemed like it was very realistic to me. I thought it was really beautifully detailed, and I loved the lore of the dragon shifter in here. I thought that was really, really beautiful. I really enjoyed their romance, but I felt like it took a little bit of a background to the overall fantasy plot, and which I don't feel like her indie romances do. I feel like her indie published books, really have the romance as equal with the fantasy, whereas I felt like this one, the romance was just a tiny step down from the overall plot. So I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars. I thought it was just completely beautiful, and I did really love this romance, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Okay, the next book that I read is His Lessons on Love. This was another ARC that I received. This is a historical romance by Kathy Maxwell, a brand new release in January. This is basically about our rake hero who ends up left with the baby that he had with his mistress, and he doesn't know how to raise it. So our heroine is trying to find a job or some way to support herself. She just left a job being a companion for a woman where she was kind of almost on the verge of being sexually assaulted by one of the men in the house. So she doesn't really know what to do. The hero and heroine, they did kind of know each other from previous books. This is a book in a series. And so when she sees that he's just left with this baby and has no idea how to take care of it, she says, well, I could be your nanny. And he's like, sounds good. Come and move in with me. You can be my nanny. When they get back to his estate, his mother sees them there, and he puts on this show for her that he's actually married to this woman and that this is their baby. So it was a bit of an interesting plot. It was pretty unique. I really actually loved the friendship that they had going on, the hero and heroine, but I didn't feel like the romance was just as developed as I wanted it to be. I really liked reading this. It was very pleasant. It was very comforting, but it was just missing the spark in the romance that I was hoping for. So I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. Okay, the next book that I read is Hooked, and this is the book that I gave 1 star. Oh boy, this is a very popular, very hyped book. Most of my friends, or most of the people that I know who have read this, have really loved it. I, however, was not one of those people. I talked about this in my most recent reading vlog. I ended up giving this book 1 star. Really didn't like anything about this. I felt like the biggest negative for me about this book was honestly the writing. The writing was very, very, very underdeveloped. It fell into a lot of beginner writing flaws that are just like very apparent to me when I see them. I can't unsee them. A lot of emotional instability in the character building. There really wasn't any development in the romance or the relationship. Oh, by the way, this is a Hook and Peter Pan retelling. Hook and Wendy romance. If you didn't know, I'm sure you did. Everybody's talking about it. I really didn't like anything about this book. I think objectively it's one of the worst written books that I've read in a very long time, and I honestly just could not get past the poor character building, the poor relationship setup. It felt like there was just way too much that was trying to be done in here, and none of it was done in a way that was convincing or felt like I could suspend my disbelief to really get invested in the story, so I didn't like this at all. I gave it 1 star. Okay, the next book that I read is Juniper Hill by Devney Perry. This is the second book in her new small town romance series. I really enjoyed this book. I felt like it was very sweet. It was very fun. This is basically about a heroine who is a New York socialite. She ends up pregnant and has a new baby, a 2-month-old baby. Some drama happens with her family and her baby daddy, so she leaves New York to find a small town where she can start over and start fresh. She doesn't have any real schooling or anything that she can start a career in, so she goes to this hotel in Quincy, Montana, and she basically is cleaning hotel rooms there. She doesn't have a place to stay, and the people who own the hotel, one of the daughters of the family, she is so desperate for help at this hotel that she offers her brothers like a loft apartment or something like that, that she can stay there with him. Of course, the brother is not happy about that, and so he definitely takes a little bit of time to warm up to the heroine, but watching him really fall in love with this woman and her new baby was just a thing of beauty. I love reading about a hero who knows that he's in love with this woman and he will do anything to get her, and I felt like that is exactly what happened here. I felt like the overall plot, there was a plot twist at the end that sort of took over. I enjoyed that too. I think probably the only reason I gave this 4 out of 5 stars is that I didn't really love the heroine a ton. I didn't hate her, but she didn't seem to be super compelling. Someone that I could really root for, or she just seemed a little watered down compared to some of the other heroines that I've read by Devney. So I enjoyed this, 4 out of 5 stars. But it's not a new all-time favorite for me. Okay, the next book that I read is River of Shadows by Karina Halley. This is her new release. I also got an ARC of this book. So this is basically a fantasy romance. It is a Death and the Maiden retelling based on Finnish mythology. And I liked this book. Death and the Maiden is my favorite trope, and I have yet to find one that is done perfectly how I want it done. So I definitely had high expectations here, and I liked this book. I thought it was fun. I thought that the fantasy world was pretty well developed. I really liked seeing the different creatures in here and the different like gods and goddesses of death, and I thought that was really interesting. I did also really enjoy the heroine and her relationship with death. I just wish that it had come a little bit closer than the last bit of what we got. This book does end on a cliffhanger, and the basic plot of this is that our heroine's father has lived in Lapland and he has passed away, so she goes over there for his funeral, only come to find out he's not actually dead, he's just been taken to the land of the dead, so she goes with a companion to try and bring him back. As she does so, she ends up making a deal with death and exchanges her life for her father's, so she has to stay with death in the underworld. So this was good. I really liked the opening chapter. It had a really sort of a feeling of a little bit of gravity, a little bit menacing, a little bit dark, like you were really thinking this was going to go to some really dark places and have more of a somber feeling to the whole book. But it was quickly apparent to me that this had a little bit of like some comedic relief, a little bit too much, which I really didn't love. Some of the comedy lines, I just felt like it didn't go with the overall tone of the book that I was wanting. And also there were just like a ton of references to pop culture that were used to be like jokes that with these creatures who didn't understand like the modern world, and that was just kind of disappointing to me. I really wanted it to just fit in with that melancholy, somber vibe, and it just didn't. So 3.5 or 4 stars for this one. Okay, well, those are all of the books that I read in January. Hope y'all enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. Please feel free to leave me a snowflake or something for winter. And I'm sorry my voice is gone at this point, but I'll see y'all in my next video.